Good evening. I am honored and very impressed by the event that Manuel and Helena pull off. This is a fantastic occasion. I'm very, very pleased that it's not about politics, economics, and sociology. For once, I'm presenting where it's about the physicality. It's about our land, and somehow it's overlooked. I'm the exception, Jerry. I got 10 minutes because I'm making I got two presentations, okay? My name is Juan Antonio Bueno. I'm a professor of landscape architecture at FIU. Unfortunately, Nicolas Quintana, who was going to be the first presenter, is very ill. He's in the hospital, and he's not going to be able to make it, so I'm going to do my best. Although I'm very familiar with this work because we've been working together, I'm going to do my best to present his, and then I will do my part, and that's why I get 10 minutes.
Quintana first.
Yes, do I just flip further? Quintana and I have been working along with the late Professor Emeritus Felipe Préstamo, UM Emeritus Professor. We've been working on a project called Havana and its Landscapes. And even though it relates to Havana, specifically is a vision for Havana, it applies to all Cuban cities. All Cuban cities, as I would get into my presentation, do have a commonality that is very, very important to address. And this study is very interesting. He did it with the architect Pedro Albizu Campos, who very recently came from Cuba. So it is fed by, let's call it inside information, the insider's knowledge of the situation. But Nicolas Quintana, his approach is one is we need to look at the physical destruction. The city has rotted. The city has imploded. Basically because overpopulation on one hand, on the other hand, very little new construction. He also, I really don't need to tell you about the spiritual destruction. We're all very familiar with the repression. We are very, very familiar with suppression of free expression, let alone criticism of anything, and of course, the extreme violence. And that's another aspect that he considers part of the destruction of the physicality of the city of Havana. And lastly, the present situation of the city. The city, beyond the destruction, the deterioration because of the neglect, it does have a few jewels that have been restored, but all Havana, sadly enough, what used to be this vibrant, incredible city, unique in the New World, totally unique, there's no place quite like it, not even close, okay? Now what it's become is a theme park. So like a Disney World. It's a few well-restored, okay, attractions for the tourists. But that's not a city. That's not a place where we like to live. That's not the place I remember as a child. Okay. Could you go? I can go. Yeah, I can do it. What he did was kind of interesting. Together with Albizu, what they did, they came up with the numbers. They got the numbers from the internet. Interesting. The one is the Cuban census, and the other one is the Statistics Bureau. And what they came up, what you first see there, the 1.698 million represents the deficit in housing units. We would call them dwelling units in the U.S. They call it something else in Cuba, and I'll get into that in a minute. It's due to overcrowding. About almost a million of that, 928,000. Due to destruction, it's about 642,000, and that also bohíos need to be replaced, which represent about 127,000 of them. The second, the 2.429, represents the units that need to be improved and the units that need to be preserved. In other words, those that are in poor to medium condition, from medium to good to regular, from regular to good condition. So we're talking about a total of 4 million units. When you apply the same numbers in the same sequence, represent the same thing for the city of Havana. By fund in the U.S., we probably would have used the word inventory. The next slide is, this is sort of representing the way they deal with this in Cuba is they don't use dwelling unit. They use unidades de alojamiento, which means that where you have a 3-bedroom house, you build a barbacoa, and all of a sudden you have 2 unidades de alojamiento, not 1. So when you use the numbers, if you were to divide the total population, each column represents one the census and the other one the bureau. It pretty much comes out to be something very reasonable. You're talking about 3.2 people, but in reality, you could have 6, 8 people living in what we consider in the U.S. a dwelling unit. So it's very, very misleading. Okay. And lastly, he wanted me to read this to you. That is why I stated that he stated that due to the incredible obliteration of Cuba's architectural, urban, and living qualities, in the future we will be facing a national reconstruction, the rebirth of a modern Cuba and its cities. Nicolas Quintana, 2011. So I do thank him for his participation in absentia, but unfortunately his mind is very clear, his spirit the same way he's always been, but he's very sick. Okay. Let me go on to mine. Okay. I'm the odd person here. Usually we don't think of the landscape as part of the infrastructure, and that's why I'm so pleased to be here. I think there's only one architect that I know, and one graduate student of mine in landscape architecture who will probably understand what I'm saying, but I will try to make it very, very simple, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have afterwards. What we did, is did a study, what we call the region of Havana. See the black line goes around? The study area goes from the seashores on the north to las alturas de Sierra de Anafe, las alturas de Bejucal, and las escaleras de Jaruco on the south. In other words, to the hilltops where the rivers spring forth. And then from Bahía de Mariel all the way to La Boca de Jaruco. It's very hard to talk in Spanish and English at the same time. The point that we like to make, and Nicolas would like to make this too, is that the Cuban city is ecologically, culturally, and aesthetically rooted in its urban, rural, and natural landscapes. Very simple, what the heck am I talking about? Try to think of Trinidad without the landscape, the rural landscape. Try to think of without the mountains. Try to think of, crossing La Bahía de La Habana, going to Regla in La Lancha, and it's impossible to ignore how the city, how old Havana, how Regla and Casablanca embrace the sea. Okay, how the sea penetrates. In fact, the city and the sea are so interdigitated, and we need to recognize that. That is part of our culture. Okay, that's what we draw our music from, that's what we draw our literature from the landscape, not just the art and the architecture. The study, my part of it, is based on 3 concepts that are alien to most engineers, and they have to do with urban regionalism, landscape ecology, and landscape urbanism, and I'll explain those very, very quickly. But before that, the justification for the work. What you see on the left is what is called the forest canopy cover. In other words, how much forest there used to be. Everything for 1500 is an estimate, but the best estimates come up to be 95%. It went all the way down to about 11%, and now the claim is that it's somewhere 16, 18%. The figure should be doubted. They could be inflated. One of the reasons, there's not that much, there's not 34% more nature in Cuba. Okay, the little nature is the high mountains, the very, very end. Oh, please, because otherwise they can't see the numbers. Okay, yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. La Ciénaga de Zapata, Sierra Maestra, las cuchillas de Toa, etc. Those are what remains, but it's inflated because a lot of the agricultural land is abandoned, and they count that as nature now, which is reverting back to nature. You let it alone, it will go back to nature, but it's a little bit misleading. But so on one hand, the picture is very bleak, just like architecturally. We used to have a wonderful forest country, and we don't anymore. We've lost quite a bit of nature. We improved economically and development-wise, we did. On the other hand, it's still worth it. This is what, so much is destroyed, but the opportunity is incredible. A transition should be, once in a lifetime opportunity to grasp it and do the best that we can with our country. To give you an idea how rich still Cuba is, this is a comparison. What you have here is the U.S., the area of the United States, including Alaska and Hawaii, and the area of Cuba, 1% of the total. Okay, that's how little Cuba is compared to the U.S. Nevertheless, if you put together the number of plants that are native, 75% are native to the U.S., 25%. In other words, 25 times more than we should have, that is our right to have. Okay, that's what. I'll finish. I'll finish. On the other hand, when you get to endemic plants means native only to Cuba. Plantas vegetación criolla. That's what is ours and nobody else's. We have 45% of that when you put the U.S. and Cuba together. Okay? The idea of regionalism is that you just don't look at La Habana Vieja. You look at the entire region. That is the unit of infrastructure, and that's what the conference is about. From the point of view of ecology, what we have done is we look at the watersheds. There are about 15 watersheds in this area. And then finally, the very end is the part that deals with the aesthetics of landscape architecture. And it's a very contemporary approach that we have taken, something that is appropriate for the complexity of a modern world-class metropolis. The Havana will be again, for sure. Thank you very much.